Since today is a primary day in a number of our states, I thought it might be a good time to take a little look back at where the Senate was a few months ago when we were confronted with the widespread Democratic big lie that in Georgia there was an effort by the Republican legislature and Republican governor to engage in voter suppression by passing a new voter law in the wake of the pandemic year that we all went through as a number of states adjusted their manner of voting, picking up some of the things that were tried during the pandemic year and rejecting others. The Democrats almost broke the Senate over this issue, came within 2 votes of getting rid of the filibuster over this issue. Well, early indications are we have record turnouts in Georgia. Record turnouts. The indications are that at least the early voting part of the new Georgia law, more people are turning out than did in the presidential primary, and dramatically more have turned out than in the 2018 primary, which would be apples and apples, 18 to 22. This conclusively proves so far that there's no effort in Georgia to suppress the vote. This was simply an effort to try to intimidate everybody, and a lot of corporate America bought into it, and a lot of other people bought into it, and some of you may have, to intimidate the Senate into federalizing the way we handle elections. It was a big lie, and the big lie is being in the process of disproven in Georgia today.
Well, once again today, Americans are paying the highest price for gasoline than ever before. With a new record, $4.60 per gallon average, and remember the day that Joe Biden took office, it was $2.38 a gallon. It's over $4 a gallon in all 50 states. It's over $5 a gallon in New York, over $6 a gallon in California. 92% of Americans will tell you that they are very concerned about the high cost of gasoline. And the president was asked about it. He talked about it in Japan, and he called it an incredible transition. I want to make sure I had it. He called it an incredible transition. The incredible transition that's happening today with energy is we're going from being a nation that's energy dominant to energy dependent. We're going from a nation of prosperity to a nation of poverty. We're going from a nation of wealth to a nation of weakness. There are people hurting all around this country. We're at a 40-year high of inflation, highest gas prices ever, and families are running out of places where they can cut their spending. They're cutting out haircuts, they're cutting out movies, they're cutting out music lessons for the kids. For people living on a fixed income, for people living paycheck to paycheck, it's no longer about how much does it cost to fill the tank. They can't afford to fill the tank. They can just take so much money to the gas station and see how much gas they'll be able to get. And as a result of these high prices, people are cutting out activities. It's Memorial Day weekend. Picnics and gatherings are being canceled all across the country. And for grandparents who spent the last 2 years in a lockdown because of COVID and couldn't see the grandkids, now we're entering a new lockdown because they can't afford the gas to go and see the grandkids. So that is the incredible transition of Joe Biden, who seems to be quite unconcerned about the high cost. He's basically saying, take your medicine, we're going to get you off of fossil fuels one way or the other. We have the energy in the ground in this country. The president ought to be getting the permits passed, the permission to drill, and the infrastructure, the energy infrastructure that is so desperately needed. Joe Biden is the president of high energy prices.
Let me add just a little more to the Georgia election law. As the leader said, Democrats took the Senate right to the edge on this. Basically, we're willing to federalize the national election process, to take the FEC. We're going to vote on an FEC commissioner today, the equally divided FEC, and turn it into a 4-2 FEC. There's a reason there are 3 Democrats and 3 Republicans on the FEC. I'm a Republican, but I'm voting for the Democrat today because there should be 3 Democrats on the FEC, just like there should be 3 Republicans. But that was part of the law they took. But part of the reason was the suppression laws that suddenly they decided were out there. The Georgia law expanded the number of mandatory early voting days. It codified drop boxes in every county, something that didn't exist at all before the pandemic. It aligned mail-in deadlines with the postal recommendations to be sure the ballots actually got counted that were mailed in. It maintained no excuse absentee voting, which neither Delaware or New York has. 2 big critics of the law were the president and the majority leader. Neither of their states have no excuse absentee voting. By Friday of last week, that was the last day of early voting, 800,000 Georgians cast early ballots. 4 years ago, 300,000 Georgians cast early ballots, and in the presidential, 326,000 Georgians voted in the presidential. Substantially more than 2 times as many people voted under the so-called suppression law as had ever voted early in Georgia before. Hopefully, now remember, this is a law that not only took the Senate to the brink over voter suppression, it was the law that moved the All-Star game out of Atlanta because of legislative suppression that has turned out producing more early voting by far than any other time in the state's history. The goal was to make it easier to vote, which they obviously have done, and harder to cheat, which they hopefully did.
Outstanding.
We have a huge crisis ongoing at the southern border, and yet what we see the Biden administration attempting to do is lift Title 42. So we know that we'll see more illegal crossings if Title 42 is lifted. And fortunately, there was a judge that stopped the Biden administration from lifting Title 42. Now, just over the weekend in Yuma, Arizona, they saw an unprecedented 1,250 illegal crossings within a 24-hour period. One day in one location. And we know how hard the folks are working at the border to protect our citizens and our nation. Republicans want the members of the CBP to know and understand we support them, and we thank them for their dedication to our country in attempting to keep us safe in spite of this administration's goals to lift Title 42. So we did put out a brand new video today that thanks those CBP officials for the wonderful job that they do in a very thankless environment with this administration. So speaking about the border crossings, we know in the former administration there was an attempt to build a border barrier across our southern border to protect our southern states and the rest of the nation from these illegal crossings. I actually do have a bill out now that would take the unused, already paid for materials that are lying in the desert. We would take those materials and provide them for the states that apply for the use of those materials to go ahead and finish those border barriers. It is called the Build It Act, and we are hoping to allow those states to go ahead with the work that will help protect our border. Every border is a border state now, thanks to President Biden's reckless, careless policies when it comes to illegal entry into the United States.
A little over 17 months ago, President Biden was inaugurated, and we didn't have the conversations I had this weekend with Floridians. This weekend, they talked about food prices, gas prices, electricity, baby formula shortages, car prices up, home prices up. Everything, every time you go and you go anywhere around Florida, all anybody wants to talk about is, why are we seeing this inflation? If you watch all the local TV now, this is exactly what they're saying. Housing prices, inflation, have South Florida residents asking this, is this the new normal? This is not going away tomorrow or in the next 6 months, real estate economist Ken Johnson says. I mean, this is exactly what's going on all across my state. Think about this. This wasn't going on 17 months ago. 8.3% inflation, PPI, producer price index up over 11%, GDP down. We know what we have to do. The Biden administration and Democrats have got to change their act. We've got to balance the budget. We've got to start watching how we spend money. We've got to reduce the cost of living by cutting taxes and fees. We've got to streamline the permitting, reduce regulation. All of these things are doable. We've got to get inflation down, and we've got to start buying American products and fix the supply chain. Unfortunately, the Biden administration has no ability to get any of these things done.
Leader McConnell. Leader McConnell. Good afternoon.
Chad.
Have you been briefed or heard anything about this plot by this fellow they picked up in Columbus, Ohio? Had the plot to kill President George W. Bush came across the southern border. Any reaction to that? And have you heard
No, I haven't heard about that until just recently, and don't have any comments on it yet.
Leader McConnell, tomorrow the Senate Foreign Relations Committee will have a hearing about Iran nuclear deal. All members of your party, except one senator, are opposed to going back to Iran nuclear deal. If that deal in fact fails, what do you think the options are for the United States of America in terms of containing the Iran nuclear program?
Well, it's pretty apparent that if the administration ends up negotiating a deal with the Iranians, they will not submit it as a treaty. Without a treaty, it's not a binding agreement on the United States, and therefore the next president could choose to walk away from it. I think I'm pretty safe in saying our allies in the Middle East, the Israelis, the Sunni Arab countries that are allied with us, are deeply disturbed that this agreement might come together, because they're pretty sure it will not have anything to do with Iran's malign activities, their collateral activities, which promote and encourage terrorism throughout the Middle East. So I'm skeptical about whether this agreement would be in the best interest of America. We'll have to see whether they submit it.
But if in fact it fails.
I hear what you're saying about the record turnout in Georgia. Some Democrats and voting rights activists would argue, well, their efforts are paying off. What would you say to that argument? That they're saying that their efforts to double down on getting more voters to turn out are paying off versus what
I'm having a hard time hearing you.
What would you say? Some Democrats and some voting rights activists say that it's their efforts that are paying off that are causing the record turnout in Georgia. What would you say to that argument?
Well, I think it's been disproven. There's no effort anywhere in America, in any state in America, to suppress voting. But, as Senator Blunt pointed out, it's also important to make it not easy to cheat. So what you want to do is encourage voter turnout, make it easier to vote and harder to cheat. And I think it's pretty obvious the new Georgia law achieved that desirable outcome. It's interesting, in national poll data, people think it actually is too easy to vote if you're looking at public opinion. I think Georgia hit the sweet spot. They obviously encouraged and made it easier to vote, but also made it harder to cheat.
Leader McConnell, on Taiwan, is the U.S. policy change toward Taiwan based on the President's comment that we will defend it militarily if attacked by China? And secondly, the fact that Taiwan was not included in the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, Jake Sullivan has talked about forming some kind of stronger trade relationship with Taiwan. Is that enough consolation for not including it in the framework?
Number one, the single most important thing we could do to send a message to the Chinese is to continue to help the Ukrainians defeat Putin. That's the view of the Prime Minister of Japan, the view of the Defense Minister of Japan, that the single most important thing we could do to push back against President Xi is to help the Ukrainians beat Putin in the war that's going on right now. I gather after walking back the President's comments, the administration has basically said that the policy under previous administrations remains the same, My suggestion is to this administration, sell to the Taiwanese the weapons they would need that are appropriate for any potential Chinese invasion. And that is the single strongest thing we could do to help the Taiwanese, just like we're helping the Ukrainians, defend themselves if, in fact, they're attacked. That, in my view, is a serious deterrent. Number one, send a message to Xi by beating Putin in Ukraine. Number two, by selling to the Taiwanese the weapons they need to defend themselves if, in fact, they're attacked.
Leader McConnell.